Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she struggled to keep up with the other recruits during the morning run. Her legs felt like concrete blocks and her lungs burned with each breath she took. The drill sergeant's voice echoed across the training grounds, shouting orders that seemed impossible to follow. She had dreamed of joining the military since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah watched her older brother leave for the Army and return as a changed man, confident, strong, and respected. She wanted that same transformation for herself. But now, 3 weeks into basic training, she was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The other recruits seemed to handle everything with ease. They could do 50 push-ups without breaking a sweat, while Sarah struggled to complete 20. During weapons training, her hands shook so badly that she could barely hold the rifle steady. The obstacle course that others finished in under 10 minutes took her nearly 15, leaving her gasping and defeated. Every night, she collapsed onto her narrow bunk bed, her entire body aching. Her bunkmate, Jessica, would offer encouraging words, but Sarah could see the doubt in her eyes. Even Jessica was starting to question whether Sarah belonged here. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges. It was the mental battle raging inside her head. Sarah had always been the girl who gave up when things got tough. In high school, she quit the basketball team after 2 weeks because the coach was too demanding. She dropped out of college after 1 semester because the coursework felt overwhelming. Her parents had warned her that the military would be different. But she had insisted she was ready for the challenge. Now, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of other recruits sleeping peacefully, Sarah wondered if her parents had been right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this life. Maybe she was destined to be a quitter forever. The next morning brought new humiliation. During the physical fitness test, Sarah failed spectacularly. She couldn't complete the required number of sit-ups. Her push-ups were sloppy, and her run time was well below the minimum standard. The drill sergeant called her to his office afterward, his face stern and unforgiving. "Martinez," he said, looking at her file. "You're not meeting the standards we expect from our soldiers. At this rate, you're going to wash out of the program within the week." Sarah's heart sank. She had come so far, invested so much hope and energy into this dream. The thought of returning home as a failure was almost unbearable. Her family had been so proud when she enlisted. Her little sister had even started telling her friends that her big sister was going to be a real soldier. "I can do better, sir," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please give me another chance." The drill sergeant studied her for a long moment. "Martinez, wanting to do better and actually doing better are two different things. You've been here 3 weeks and you're still performing like you just walked off the street. What makes you think things are going to change now?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She stood there in silence, feeling smaller and more defeated than she had ever felt in her life. The drill sergeant dismissed her with a warning that she had exactly 1 week to show significant improvement, or she would be sent home. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, picking at her food while the other recruits chatted and laughed around her. She felt invisible, like a ghost haunting a place where she didn't belong. The weight of impending failure pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to her parents, explaining that she would be coming home soon. The words came slowly, each one feeling like an admission of defeat. She wrote about how sorry she was for disappointing them, how she had tried her best but just wasn't strong enough for military life. As she sealed the letter, tears rolled down her cheeks. Tomorrow would bring another day of struggle, another day of falling short of expectations. She was ready to give up, ready to accept that some people just weren't meant to be soldiers. But fate had other plans for Sarah Martinez. Across the base, a conversation was taking place that would change the course of her life forever. A SEAL commander had been observing the training exercises, and he had noticed something in Sarah that even she didn't know existed. Commander Marcus Blake stood at the edge of the training field, watching the recruits struggle through their morning exercises. His weathered face showed no emotion as he observed their movements, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. Blake had been a Navy SEAL for over 15 years, and he had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot potential in people who didn't even know they possessed it. He wasn't supposed to be here at this Army basic training facility. Blake was visiting as part of a joint military cooperation program, studying how different branches trained their recruits. His own experience with SEAL training had taught him that true strength often came from the most unexpected places. As he watched the recruits, one soldier caught his attention. While the others powered through their exercises with varying degrees of success, there was one young woman who kept falling behind. She struggled with every task, failed most of her attempts, and looked ready to collapse at any moment. Most observers would have written her off immediately, but Blake saw something different. He watched as the young woman, Martinez according to the name tape on her uniform, fell during the rope climb exercise. Instead of staying down and accepting defeat like so many others would have done, she got back up. Her hands were bleeding, her arms were shaking, but she attempted the climb again, and again, and again. Each failure seemed to fuel something inside her rather than break her spirit. Blake had seen this quality before, but rarely in such raw form. It wasn't physical strength that made a great soldier. It was mental resilience, the refusal to quit even when everything seemed hopeless. He continued watching Martinez throughout the day. During combat training, she was thrown to the ground repeatedly by larger opponents, but she kept getting back up. During weapons training, her shots missed the target more often than they hit, but she never stopped trying to improve her stance and grip. What impressed Blake most was something the drill sergeant seemed to miss entirely. While other recruits complained about the heat, the difficulty of the exercises, or the unfairness of their treatment, Martinez never once made an excuse. She simply absorbed the criticism, nodded, and tried again. That evening, Blake approached Drill Sergeant Collins, the man in charge of Martinez's unit. Collins was a good soldier, but like many instructors, he focused primarily on immediate results rather than long-term potential. "Tell me about Martinez," Blake said without preamble. Collins looked surprised. "Martinez? Sir, she's one of our weakest recruits. Honestly, we're probably going to have to send her home next week. She can't meet any of the physical standards, and she doesn't seem to have the natural aptitude for military life." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "What about her attitude?" "Her attitude?" Collins considered this. "Well, she doesn't complain much, I'll give her that. And she does keep trying. Even when it's obvious she's going to fail. But sir, with respect, attitude only goes so far. At some point you need to be able to perform." "Has she ever quit anything?" Blake asked. Collins looked confused by the question. "Quit? Well, no, not since she's been here. But she's only been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks of constant failure, constant humiliation, constant physical and mental pressure," Blake said quietly. "And she's still here, still trying." That night, Blake made some phone calls. He contacted his superiors and requested permission to implement an experimental training program. He had an idea, something that had been forming in his mind for months but had never found the right candidate to test it on. The next morning, Blake watched Martinez fail her physical fitness test for what the drill sergeants assumed would be the final time. He saw the defeat in her eyes, the slump of her shoulders, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. But he also saw something else, a tiny spark of defiance that refused to be completely extinguished. After Martinez met with Drill Sergeant Collins and received her final warning, Blake approached her. She was sitting alone outside the barracks, staring at the ground with unseeing eyes. "Recruit Martinez," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. Sarah looked up, startled. She had never seen this man before, but his uniform and bearing clearly marked him as someone important. She scrambled to her feet and attempted a salute. "At ease," Blake said. "I'm Commander Blake, Navy SEALs. I've been watching your training." Sarah's heart sank even further. If a SEAL commander was here to talk to her, it probably meant her failure was even more spectacular than she had imagined. "Sir, I know I haven't been performing well," she began. But Blake held up a hand to stop her. "Martinez, what I'm about to tell you might sound strange, but I want you to listen carefully. Sometimes the people who struggle the most in the beginning have the greatest potential for growth. I've seen soldiers who cruise through basic training burn out the moment they faced real adversity. And I've seen people who nearly washed out become some of the finest warriors I've ever known." Sarah looked at him with confusion and a tiny flicker of hope. "I have a proposition for you," Blake continued. "Instead of washing out of basic training, I want to offer you something different. Something that will challenge you in ways you can't imagine, but might also give you the tools you need to succeed." He paused, studying her face carefully. The question is, are you ready to discover what you're really made of? Sarah stared at Commander Blake, trying to process what he had just said. After weeks of failure and humiliation, the idea that someone saw potential in her seemed impossible to believe. Her first instinct was to assume this was some kind of test or cruel joke. "Sir, I don't understand," she said carefully. "What kind of proposition?" Blake smiled slightly, the first warm expression she had seen from any superior officer since arriving at basic training. "Walk with me, Martinez." They began walking across the base past groups of recruits engaged in various training exercises. Sarah felt self-conscious, wondering what the other soldiers thought about seeing her walking with a SEAL commander. "Tell me why you enlisted," Blake said as they walked. Sarah had been asked this question many times during processing, and she always gave the same rehearsed answer about serving her country and following family tradition. But something about Blake's demeanor made her want to be honest. "I wanted to prove I wasn't a quitter," she said quietly. "My whole life I've given up on things when they got hard. I thought maybe the military would force me to change. And how's that working out so far?" Blake asked without any trace of mockery in his voice. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Not so well, obviously." They stopped near a small building that Sarah had never been inside. Blake turned to face her directly. "Martinez, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. In my 15 years as a SEAL, I've worked with hundreds of soldiers, Marines, and other SEALs. Some were naturally gifted athletes, some were tactical geniuses, some were born leaders. But the ones who impressed me most were the ones who refused to quit, even when quitting would have been the logical choice." He gestured toward the training fields where her fellow recruits were practicing. "Those soldiers out there are doing fine, but they've never really been tested. They don't know what they're capable of because they've never been pushed to their absolute limit. You, on the other hand, have been living at your limit for 3 weeks straight." Sarah felt a strange mix of hope and skepticism. "But sir, I'm failing everything. How is that a good thing?" "Because failure is information," Blake said simply. "Every time you fail, you learn something about yourself. Every time you get back up, you build a kind of strength that can't be taught in any manual." He pulled out a folder from his jacket and handed it to her. "This is a special assignment. I've arranged for you to be temporarily transferred to a different kind of training program. It's not traditional military training, and it's not going to be easy. In fact, it might be harder than anything you've experienced so far." Sarah opened the folder and saw official-looking documents with the Navy SEAL insignia at the top. Her eyes widened as she tried to make sense of what she was reading. "Sir, this says I'm being assigned to assist with SEAL training operations, but I'm not even qualified to complete basic training." "That's exactly why you're perfect for this assignment," Blake said. "I need someone who understands what it feels like to struggle. Someone who knows what it's like to fail and keep trying anyway. The candidates who come through SEAL training are some of the most elite soldiers in the world, but they need to learn how to support team members who might not be as naturally gifted as they are." He paused, letting this sink in. "Your job will be to participate in certain training exercises alongside SEAL candidates. You'll be what we call a reality check, someone who represents the soldiers they might need to work with in real combat situations. Soldiers who aren't perfect, who might need extra help, who might slow down the mission." Sarah felt overwhelmed. "But sir, won't I just slow everyone down? Won't I make their training less effective?" "On the contrary," Blake said. "One of the biggest challenges SEALs face in real combat is learning to work with soldiers from other branches who might not have their level of training. They need to learn patience, leadership, and how to bring out the best in people who are struggling." He looked at her intently. "But this isn't charity, Martinez. This assignment will push you harder than basic training ever could. You'll be training alongside some of the most elite soldiers in the world. They'll expect you to keep up, and they won't go easy on you just because you're there to help them learn." Sarah felt her heart racing. The opportunity sounded incredible but also terrifying. What if I can't do it? What if I wash out of this too? "Then you wash out," Blake said bluntly. "But at least you'll wash out knowing you tried something extraordinary instead of accepting defeat at the first level. The question is, are you willing to take that risk?" Sarah thought about the letter she had written to her parents the night before, full of apologies and admissions of failure. She thought about returning home with nothing to show for her efforts except the knowledge that she had given up when things got difficult. Then, she thought about the tiny spark of defiance that had kept her going through 3 weeks of constant failure. Maybe Blake was right. Maybe all that struggle had been building something inside her that she couldn't see yet. "When would I start?" she asked. Blake smiled. "Tomorrow morning. Your gear will be waiting in your barracks tonight, along with detailed instructions about what to expect. And Martinez? Yes, sir? This is your chance to find out who you really are underneath all that doubt and fear. Don't waste it. As Blake walked away, Sarah stood alone, holding the folder that might change her life. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Sarah barely slept that night. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, alternating between excitement and pure terror about what the next day would bring. When her alarm went off at 400 hours, she was already wide awake. The gear Blake had promised was waiting for her, along with a note explaining that she should report to Building 7 at 500 hours. As she put on the different uniform, darker, more tactical looking than her basic training gear, she felt like she was putting on a disguise for a role she wasn't qualified to play. Building 7 turned out to be a nondescript concrete structure on the far side of the base. When Sarah arrived, she found 12 other soldiers already assembled outside. These weren't basic training recruits. These men looked like they had stepped out of an action movie. Tall, muscular, confident, with eyes that seemed to see everything. These were the SEAL candidates. Sarah felt immediately out of place. Where she was average height and still struggling to build muscle, these men looked like they could break her in half without effort. Where she felt nervous and uncertain, they radiated calm confidence. Commander Blake appeared from the building and addressed the group. Gentlemen and lady, welcome to the next phase of your training. For the next 4 weeks, you'll be participating in advanced team integration exercises. These exercises are designed to simulate real-world combat situations where you'll need to work with soldiers from different branches and different skill levels. He gestured toward Sarah. Martinez here represents the reality you'll face in actual combat missions. She's not a SEAL candidate. She's not an elite athlete, and she doesn't have advanced training. What she does have is determination and the willingness to try. Your job is to learn how to incorporate soldiers like Martinez into your mission successfully. One of the SEAL candidates, a tall man with intense blue eyes, raised his hand. Sir, with respect, won't this slow down our training? Shouldn't we be focusing on pushing ourselves to the limit? Blake's expression hardened. Thompson, when you're on a real mission and you're assigned to work with Army infantry, or Air Force personnel, or local allies who don't have your training, are you going to abandon them because they slow you down? No, sir, Thompson replied, but Sarah could see the skepticism in his face. Your first exercise begins now, Blake announced. You have 4 hours to complete a 20-mile navigation course through the wilderness. All team members must finish together, and Martinez must be able to complete the course. Thompson, your team leader. Sarah's heart sank. A 20-mile hike in 4 hours was challenging even for experienced soldiers. She had never completed anything close to that distance, and certainly not in that time frame. The team set off into the forest, and within the first mile, it became obvious that Sarah was going to be a problem. While the SEAL candidates moved with easy efficiency, she was already breathing hard and struggling to keep up. This is ridiculous, muttered one of the candidates, a stocky man named Rodriguez. We're going to fail because of her. Thompson, the team leader, seemed torn between pushing ahead and staying with the group. Martinez, can you move any faster? Sarah was already pushing herself harder than she ever had before, but she could see the frustration in their faces. I'm trying my best, she gasped. Your best isn't good enough, Rodriguez said bluntly. But then something unexpected happened. Another candidate, a quiet man named Wilson, dropped back to walk beside Sarah. Here, he said, taking her heavy pack. Let me carry this for a while. You don't have to do that, Sarah protested. Yes, I do, Wilson said simply. We're a team. Teams help each other. Thompson looked annoyed. Wilson, you're just enabling her weakness. No, Wilson replied firmly. I'm problem solving. In a real mission, if a team member is struggling, you adapt. You don't abandon them. As they continued through the forest, something interesting began to happen. The candidates started finding different ways to help Sarah without slowing the entire group down. Rodriguez showed her a more efficient walking technique that saved energy. Another candidate named Chen gave her tips on breathing that helped her maintain a steady pace. But it was Sarah herself who surprised everyone most. Despite being exhausted and outmatched, she never once asked them to slow down or take a break. When she stumbled and fell, she got back up immediately. When her legs felt like they were going to give out, she kept moving forward. By the third hour, something had shifted in the group dynamic. The SEAL candidates stopped seeing Sarah as dead weight and started seeing her as a challenge to overcome together. They began working as a true team, with each member contributing their strengths to help the group succeed. With 30 minutes left and still 3 miles to go, it looked like they might not make it. Sarah was running on pure willpower, and even the SEAL candidates were feeling the pressure of the tight timeline. "We need to pick up the pace," Thompson said, but he was looking at Sarah with concern rather than frustration. "I can do it," Sarah said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. Wilson looked at her with new respect. "I believe you can." They pushed through the final 3 miles in a blur of determination and teamwork. When they crossed the finish line with just 2 minutes to spare, the entire team collapsed in exhaustion, but they had done it, together. Commander Blake was waiting for them at the finish line, and Sarah could see approval in his eyes as he looked at the group. "Congratulations," he said. "You've just completed your first real mission as a team." "Thompson, what did you learn?" Thompson looked at Sarah, then back at Blake. "I learned that sometimes the weakest link can make the whole chain stronger, sir." Sarah felt tears of exhaustion and joy rolling down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she had been part of something bigger than herself, and she had contributed to its success rather than holding it back. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The next 4 weeks would bring challenges she couldn't even imagine yet. The fourth and final week of training culminated in what Commander Blake called the Integration Challenge, a complex, multi-day exercise that would test everything the team had learned about working together under extreme pressure. The scenario was realistic and terrifying. The team was dropped into a remote wilderness area with minimal supplies and given a mission that seemed almost impossible: locate and rescue a captured diplomat while avoiding enemy patrols, navigate through hostile territory, and extract to a pickup point 30 miles away. They had 72 hours to complete the mission. What made it even more challenging was that the team would be constantly monitored and graded not just on their success, but on how well they integrated Sarah into their operations and whether they could complete the mission without leaving anyone behind. Sarah knew this was her final test. If she failed here after all the progress she had made, it would prove that she really wasn't cut out for military life. The weight of that possibility pressed down on her as they prepared for insertion. The first challenge came immediately. They had to parachute into the target area, and Sarah had only basic airborne training. While the SEAL candidates handled their equipment with practiced ease, Sarah struggled with her gear and nearly became tangled in her lines during descent. She landed hard in a muddy field, her ankle twisting painfully on impact. For a moment, she lay there wondering if she had just ended the mission before it began. But Wilson was beside her immediately, checking for injuries and helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" Thompson asked, his voice tense with concern. Sarah tested her weight on the injured ankle. It hurt, but she could move. "I can make it," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The team quickly established their position and began moving toward their first objective. Sarah's ankle throbbed with each step, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with the group. She had learned over the past weeks that complaining about pain didn't help anyone. By the second day, they had successfully located the captured diplomat and were beginning their extraction route. But the exercise controllers had thrown in a complication. Enemy forces were closing in, and the team had to move fast to avoid capture. This was where Sarah's weeks of struggle finally paid off in an unexpected way. While the SEAL candidates were focused on speed and tactical movement, Sarah's experience with constant failure had taught her to notice details that others missed. As they moved through a dense forest section, Sarah spotted something that made her freeze. "Wait," she whispered urgently to Thompson. "What is it?" he asked, already reaching for his weapon. Sarah pointed to a barely visible tripwire stretched across their path. "Booby trap. If you had taken another step." Thompson stared at the wire, then at Sarah. In their rush to move quickly, he and the other SEAL candidates had missed a trap that could have ended their mission and potentially injured team members. "Good catch," Rodriguez said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I almost walked right into that." As they carefully disarmed and bypassed the trap, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before: the knowledge that her contribution had genuinely helped protect her team. She wasn't just keeping up anymore. She was actively making the mission more successful. The final challenge came on the third day, just hours before their scheduled extraction. The team reached the pickup point only to discover that enemy forces had discovered their location and were moving to intercept them. They had to fight their way to an alternate extraction site while protecting the rescued diplomat. The simulated firefight was intense and chaotic. The SEAL candidates moved with practiced precision, but the scenario was designed to be overwhelming. In the confusion, Sarah found herself separated from the main group with Chen, who had been wounded in the initial contact. This was exactly the kind of situation Sarah would have panicked in just a month ago. But something had changed inside her. Instead of freezing or breaking down, she felt a strange calm settle over her. "I can't move my leg," Chen said, playing his role as wounded soldier. "You need to get to the extraction point and tell them to come back for me." Sarah looked at him steadily. "No, we all go together or nobody goes. Martinez, be realistic. You can't carry me that distance, and if you try, you'll just get both of us captured." Sarah thought quickly, remembering everything she had learned about problem-solving under pressure. "I can't carry you, but I can help you move. And I can call for support." She used her radio to contact Thompson, giving him precise coordinates and a clear assessment of their situation. Then she helped Chen devise a way to move despite his injury, using techniques Wilson had taught her during water training about working with your environment instead of fighting against it. 20 minutes later, the rest of the team reached them, having fought their way through the simulated enemy forces. Thompson looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "You held your position, protected a wounded teammate, and provided accurate intelligence that allowed us to reach you," he said. That was textbook combat leadership. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were tears of accomplishment rather than frustration. For the first time in her life, she had faced a crisis and responded with competence and courage instead of panic and self-doubt. When they finally reached the extraction point and completed the mission successfully, Commander Blake was waiting for them with a smile that spoke volumes. "Congratulations," he said to the group. "You've just completed one of the most challenging integration exercises in our training program." Every single team member contributed to this success. As the team celebrated their achievement, Sarah realized that she had fundamentally changed over the past month. She was still the same person who had nearly washed out of basic training, but now she understood that her struggles had been building something valuable inside her all along. She wasn't the strongest or fastest or most skilled member of the team, but she had become something equally important, a soldier who could be counted on to keep going when things got difficult, to notice important details under pressure, and to put the team's success above her own comfort. The fourth and final week of training culminated in what Commander Blake called the Integration Challenge, a complex, multi-day exercise that would test everything the team had learned about working together under extreme pressure. The scenario was realistic and terrifying. The team was dropped into a remote wilderness area with minimal supplies and given a mission that seemed almost impossible: locate and rescue a captured diplomat while avoiding enemy patrols, navigate through hostile territory, and extract to a pickup point 30 miles away. They had 72 hours to complete the mission. What made it even more challenging was that the team would be constantly monitored and graded not just on their success, but on how well they integrated Sarah into their operations, and whether they could complete the mission without leaving anyone behind. Sarah knew this was her final test. If she failed here after all the progress she had made, it would prove that she really wasn't cut out for military life. The weight of that possibility pressed down on her as they prepared for insertion. The first challenge came immediately. They had to parachute into the target area, and Sarah had only basic airborne training. While the SEAL candidates handled their equipment with practiced ease, Sarah struggled with her gear and nearly became tangled in her lines during descent. She landed hard in a muddy field, her ankle twisting painfully on impact. For a moment she lay there wondering if she had just ended the mission before it began. But Wilson was beside her immediately, checking for injuries and helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" Thompson asked, his voice tense with concern. Sarah tested her weight on the injured ankle. It hurt, but she could move. "I can make it," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The team quickly established their position and began moving toward their first objective. Sarah's ankle throbbed with each step, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with the group. She had learned over the past weeks that complaining about pain didn't help anyone. By the second day, they had successfully located the captured diplomat and were beginning their extraction route. But the exercise controllers had thrown in a complication. Enemy forces were closing in, and the team had to move fast to avoid capture. This was where Sarah's weeks of struggle finally paid off in an unexpected way. While the SEAL candidates were focused on speed and tactical movement, Sarah's experience with constant failure had taught her to notice details that others missed. As they moved through a dense forest section, Sarah spotted something that made her freeze. "Wait," she whispered urgently to Thompson. "What is it?" he asked, already reaching for his weapon. Sarah pointed to a barely visible tripwire stretched across their path. "Booby trap. If you had taken another step." Thompson stared at the wire, then at Sarah. In their rush to move quickly, he and the other SEAL candidates had missed a trap that could have ended their mission and potentially injured team members. "Good catch," Rodriguez said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I almost walked right into that." As they carefully disarmed and bypassed the trap, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before: the knowledge that her contribution had genuinely helped protect her team. She wasn't just keeping up anymore, she was actively making the mission more successful. The final challenge came on the third day, just hours before their scheduled extraction. The team reached the pickup point only to discover that enemy forces had discovered their location and were moving to intercept them. They had to fight their way to an alternate extraction site while protecting the rescued diplomat. The simulated firefight was intense and chaotic. The SEAL candidates moved with practiced precision, but the scenario was designed to be overwhelming. In the confusion, Sarah found herself separated from the main group with Chen, who had been wounded in the initial contact. This was exactly the kind of situation Sarah would have panicked in just a month ago. But something had changed inside her. Instead of freezing or breaking down, she felt a strange calm settle over her. "I can't move my leg," Chen said, playing his role as wounded soldier. "You need to get to the extraction point and tell them to come back for me." Sarah looked at him steadily. "No, we all go together or nobody goes. Martinez, be realistic. You can't carry me that distance, and if you try, you'll just get both of us captured." Sarah thought quickly, remembering everything she had learned about problem-solving under pressure. "I can't carry you, but I can help you move. And I can call for support." She used her radio to contact Thompson, giving him precise coordinates and a clear assessment of their situation. Then she helped Chen devise a way to move despite his injury, using techniques Wilson had taught her during water training about working with your environment instead of fighting against it. 20 minutes later, the rest of the team reached them, having fought their way through the simulated enemy forces. Thompson looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "You held your position, protected a wounded teammate, and provided accurate intelligence that allowed us to reach you," he said. "That was textbook combat leadership." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were tears of accomplishment rather than frustration. For the first time in her life, she had faced a crisis and responded with competence and courage instead of panic and self-doubt. When they finally reached the extraction point and completed the mission successfully, Commander Blake was waiting for them with a smile that spoke volumes. "Congratulations," he said to the group. "You've just completed one of the most challenging integration exercises in our training program." Every single team member contributed to this success. As the team celebrated their achievement, Sarah realized that she had fundamentally changed over the past month. She was still the same person who had nearly washed out of basic training, but now she understood that her struggles had been building something valuable inside her all along. She wasn't the strongest or fastest or most skilled member of the team, but she had become something equally important: a soldier who could be counted on to keep going when things got difficult, to notice important details under pressure, and to put the team's success above her own comfort. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in front of her bathroom mirror adjusting her dress uniform for the graduation ceremony. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable from the recruit who had nearly washed out of basic training just 4 months earlier. The physical changes were obvious. She had gained muscle, lost the soft edges of civilian life, and carried herself with a confidence that hadn't existed before. But the deeper changes were even more profound. The doubt and self-hatred that had clouded her eyes for years had been replaced by something harder to Defined but impossible to miss, the quiet strength of someone who had discovered what they were truly capable of. Commander Blake had requested that Sarah return to the basic training facility for the graduation ceremony. Her original unit was completing their training today, and many of the recruits who had watched her struggle were now becoming full soldiers themselves. As she walked onto the parade ground, Sarah spotted Jessica, her former bunkmate, among the graduating recruits. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise and delight when she saw Sarah approaching in her dress uniform with new insignia and ribbons that told the story of her extraordinary month with the SEAL candidates. "Sarah? Oh my God, I can't believe it's you." Jessica hugged her tightly. "We heard you got transferred to some special program, but nobody knew what happened to you. You look incredible." Sarah smiled, remembering the scared, defeated girl who had shared a bunk with Jessica just months ago. It's been quite a journey. During the ceremony, Sarah was called to the platform to receive a special commendation for her performance during the integration challenge. As she walked across the stage, she could see the faces of recruits who had written her off as a failure, now watching with expressions of amazement and respect. But the moment that meant the most came when Drill Sergeant Collins approached her after the ceremony. This was the man who had told her she would never make it as a soldier, who had been ready to send her home in defeat. "Martinez," he said, his voice unusually soft, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. Commander Blake showed me some of the reports from your training with the SEAL candidates. What you accomplished there, I've never seen anything like it." Sarah looked at the man who had once represented everything she feared about her own inadequacy. Now she could see that he was just a good soldier doing his job, trying to weed out people who wouldn't be able to handle military life. He had been wrong about her, but not because he was a bad judge of character. He was wrong because Sarah herself hadn't known what she was capable of. "You weren't wrong, sir," Sarah said quietly. "I really was failing. I just wasn't finished yet." After the ceremony, Sarah met with Commander Blake one final time. They sat in his office, the same room where he had first offered her the chance that changed her life. "So what's next for you, Martinez?" Blake asked. Sarah had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I want to finish basic training properly, sir." "Complete it the way it was meant to be completed." Blake raised an eyebrow. "You know you don't have to do that, right? Your performance with the SEAL candidates has earned you options that most soldiers never get. You could move directly into advanced training, special operations, officer candidate school." "I know, sir. But I started something 4 months ago, and I want to finish it. Not because I have to prove anything to anyone else anymore, but because I want to prove something to myself." Blake nodded with understanding. "And after that?" Sarah smiled. "After that, I want to help train soldiers like I used to be. Soldiers who think they're not good enough, who are ready to give up on themselves. I want to show them what I learned, that struggling doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong. You just have to stick around long enough to find out how strong." 2 weeks later, Sarah returned to basic training as a student once again, but this time was completely different. The exercises that had once seemed impossible were now challenging but manageable. The drill sergeants who had once intimidated her now seemed like tough but fair instructors, helping her become better. Most importantly, Sarah found herself naturally becoming a leader among the newer recruits. When she saw someone struggling with an obstacle course, she remembered Wilson's patient guidance and offered help. When someone was ready to quit during a difficult exercise, she shared what she had learned about finding strength in struggle. The other recruits began to look up to her, not because she was the strongest or fastest, but because she had an unshakable belief that anyone could overcome their limitations if they refused to give up. On graduation day, Sarah stood among her fellow soldiers as they recited their oath of service. But for her, the words carried special meaning. She wasn't just promising to serve her country. She was promising to live up to the potential that Commander Blake had seen in her when she couldn't see it herself. After the ceremony, Sarah's family surrounded her with hugs and congratulations. Her parents, who had worried about her decision to join the military, now beamed with pride. Her little sister looked at her with the same admiration Sarah had once felt for her older brother. "I'm so proud of you," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "When you first left for basic training, I was so worried. You had quit so many things before." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "I know, Mom. But I think I needed to quit all those other things so I would understand how important it was not to quit this." As her family celebrated around her, Sarah thought about the letter she had written to them during her darkest moment in basic training. The letter full of apologies and admissions of failure that she had never sent. That letter was still in her personal effects, a reminder of how close she had come to giving up on herself. Now she understood that Commander Blake hadn't just given her a special assignment that day. He had given her the chance to discover who she really was underneath all her doubts and fears. He had seen something in her that she couldn't see herself, not because he was exceptionally wise, but because he understood that true strength often comes disguised as struggle. Years later, Sarah would go on to have a distinguished military career, eventually becoming an instructor herself and helping thousands of struggling recruits discover their own hidden strength. But she would always remember the moment when a SEAL commander saw past her failures to the soldier she could become, and gave her an order that changed not just her military career, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be strong. The girl who couldn't make it through basic training had become a woman who could make it through anything, not because she had stopped struggling, but because she had learned that the struggle itself was making her stronger than she ever imagined possible.